Settle in now and pull the blanket close. Tonight's tale begins on a cold and lonely plain far to the north, where the wind never quite stops talking. There is a boy out there, thin, ragged, no more than 9 years old, and he has just lost everything he had. Look at his face, remember it. Now nobody looking at that boy would ever have guessed. Not one soul on that frozen grass would have bet a single sheep that he'd amount to anything at all. And yet, this hungry, shivering child would one day hold more of the world in his fist than any man before him or since. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you have to know the land that made him, Mongolia. Picture a sea of grass so wide it swallows the sound of your own voice, burning hot in the short summer and cruel, killing cold in the long winter. No cities out there, no walls, just the grass, the sky, and the folk who followed their herds across it. These were the Mongols, herders, riders, hunters. A child could sit a horse near enough before it could walk. They lived in round felt tents, drank the milk of their mares, and moved with the turning seasons. A hardy people, mind you, but and here lies all the trouble. They could not, for the life of them, stop fighting one another. Tribe against tribe, clan against clan. They stole one another's horses, one another's wives, and settled old grudges with fresh blood. A man's whole world stretched only as far as his own people. Beyond that, everyone was a stranger, and out there, a stranger was as good as an enemy. That was simply the way of things. Everyone knew it. Our boy was born into all this, and given the name Temujin. His father was a chieftain, not a great one, but respected, the kind of man others listened to. And for a while, mind you, the boy's life was ordinary enough. Then one day his father rode off across the grass to arrange a marriage for him, as fathers did. On the way home, he stopped at the camp of the Tartars, an old enemy people. They welcomed him, as custom demanded, and shared their food with him. But the Tartars had long memories, and somewhere in that meal, in a cup passed to him with a smile, there was poison. He rode on toward home, not knowing. He made it back, but only barely. And there, over a few slow and terrible days, the strong chieftain withered and died, and everything the boy knew died along with him. Temujin was perhaps 9 years old, and on the steppe, a family with no grown man to protect it was a family left standing out in the open in a storm. And sure enough, the storm came. The clan they belonged to looked at the widow and her little ones, all those hungry mouths, and no strong arm to hunt or fight for them, and they made a cold, hard decision. They packed up their tents and their herds, and they left. Simply rode away one morning and left the family behind to die. The mother's name was Holun, and this is where our story first begins to turn. A lesser woman might have lain down in the grass and wept. Not her. Holun tied up her hair, took up a stick, and walked out onto the plain to dig for roots and wild berries and field mice, whatever it took to keep her children breathing. And so they lived, right on the very edge of nothing at all. The children grew up thin and watchful, knowing hunger the way other children know their mother's lullabies. It is a hard way to raise a boy, that, but hard ground, the old folk say, grows the deepest roots. And Temujin was learning things no comfortable child ever could. Now here is a part the old storytellers never soften, and I won't either, because it matters. Temujin had a half-brother named Börte, a little older and a bit of a bully. When food was scarce, and food was always scarce, Börte took the best of it for himself. Snatched a fish once, a little lark another time, right out of the younger one's hands. So Temujin and his younger brother did a dreadful thing. They crept up on Börte as he sat watching the horses, and they killed him. The boy who would one day rule the world took his own brother's life over a fish and a small bird. His mother was horrified when she learned of it. She scolded him fiercely, and he never forgot the harder lesson buried underneath her anger. And the lesson was this: a house divided against itself cannot stand. Out there, on that thin knife edge of survival, a family that turned on itself was simply a family that died. He would carry that certainty with him all his life, that the people at your side must be as one, or all of you are lost together. A cruel way to learn a truth, but learn it he did. As Temujin grew, he became something worth the fearing, and that, of course, drew notice. A rival clan swept down on him one day and carried him off. They locked a heavy wooden collar around his neck, a thing called a kang, so he couldn't run, couldn't even feed himself, and they made him a slave. Passed him from tent to tent, a prisoner. But here's the thing about our young man, he was patient and he watched. So one night during a feast, when the drink was flowing freely and the guards had grown careless, he swung that heavy collar, knocked his keeper flat to the ground, and slipped away into the dark. He hid himself in a river with only his face above the water, and he waited. And here is the part I love best. A man from that very camp found him there in the water and did not raise the alarm. Instead, he leaned close and whispered, "Go, I'll say nothing." Even among his own captors, you see, something about this young man made people want him to live. That too is a kind of power, a quieter kind than any sword. Free once more, and half-grown into a man now, Temujin went to claim an old promise. Years before, back before all the sorrow, his father had betrothed him to a girl named Börte. He rode across the grass to find her, and wonder of wonders, she was waiting, and her people honored the old word. She came to him with a coat of fine black sable fur for her dowry. Now that sable coat, that was a small fortune in itself, and Temujin, clever even then, did not keep it for himself. No, he carried it as a gift to the most powerful man he could reach, Togrul, an old sworn friend of his dead father and Khan of a great tribe. He gave away his one treasure to buy something worth far, far more, a protector, a friend up at the very top. But happiness on the steppe never did last long. One grey dawn came the sound of hoofbeats, the Merkit people riding down to settle an old score of their own. They tore through the camp, and when the dust finally settled, Börte was gone, stolen clean away. And for Temujin, it was the old nightmare all over again, the strong taking from the weak, and himself too small to stop it. But he was not that helpless little boy anymore, was he? He went to Togrul, his father's old friend, and to a companion of his youth named Jamaka, and he called in every favor, every bond he had. And they came. Together, 3 warbands rode down upon the Merkits and shattered them, and Temujin carried his Börte home again. Loyalty, you see, had teeth now. That companion, Jamaka, there's a whole tale in him alone. As boys, the 2 of them had sworn the deepest oath the steppe knew, to be blood brothers, closer than kin, closer than blood itself. And for a time after the rescue they lived as one people, side by side. The old storytellers say those were good years. But 2 rams, they also say, cannot share the one mountain. For the 2 friends, it turned out, wanted different worlds. Jamaka stood for the old way, the noble born on top, the common herder below, and your birth deciding everything you'd ever be. But Temujin, remember, had been the abandoned child. He had learned for himself who truly stood by a man, not the highborn, but the loyal. And loyalty, he believed, ought to be repaid above all else. So the 2 of them parted ways, and slowly, quietly, the ordinary herders began to choose. A man who kept his word, who shared out his spoils fairly, who lifted up the faithful no matter how lowly they were born. Word of a man like that spreads from tent to tent like warmth on a cold night. And the common people began drifting toward Temujin's fires, not driven there, drawn. And as they gathered to him, he built something the steppe had never once seen. He broke the old tribes apart on purpose and mixed the people together into fresh groups of 10, of 100, of 1,000, bound now not by blood, but by trust. Rise on your own merit, he told them. Serve well, and it will not matter one bit whose son you are. And to the beaten enemy, he offered something stranger still, not slaughter, but a place. Fight me, he said, and you may yet ride at my side when it's done. Herdsmen who had known nothing their whole lives but being used were suddenly handed dignity and a fair share and a reason to belong to something. Is it any wonder they loved him? Men will follow that to the ends of the earth. It took years, mind you, long, grinding years, and more than one bitter defeat along the way. There was one night he was reduced to a mere handful of followers, drinking muddy water from a pond, swearing he would never once forget the few who had stayed. But bit by bit, tribe by tribe, the whole sea of grass fell under his one hand, even Jamukha in the end, even the oldest of friends. And so, in the year 1206, they came together at last, every clan of the steppe, gathered at the source of a sacred river, and there they raised him up and gave him a brand new name. No longer only Temujin, now he was Genghis Khan, which means, near enough, the fierce and universal ruler. The abandoned orphan had become a king over them all. He gave his people laws now, plain and firm, the yasa they were called, and a written script to set them down in, and a fierce loyalty that ran in both directions, up and down. And then this united nation, this thing he had built out of scattered, starving, quarreling folk, slowly turned its face outward, toward the great walled kingdoms of the world, toward China, and far beyond. And what came next? Well, the world still shivers a little to remember it. Great walls that had stood for centuries came tumbling down. Empires that had thought themselves eternal simply ended. A lone merchant could carry gold from one edge of the earth clear to the other under his peace, and a great deal of blood soaked into a great deal of ground. Both of those things are true at once. But that the conquests, the empire grown wider than any before it in all of history, that is a tale for other nights. Tonight, you and I only wanted the making of the man. How a frozen, fatherless boy with nothing at all in his hands became the one who reached out and changed the very shape of the world. That is the part worth the remembering. He died in the year 1227, an old man by then, though still in the saddle, still moving as he always had. His people carried him home to the steppe he had come from, and they buried him in secret, no mound raised over him, no marker, no stone. The old tales say they let 1,000 horses trample the ground flat, so that no living soul would ever find him, and no one ever has. So somewhere out there still, under that same wide grass, beneath that same enormous sky, he is sleeping, and the wind that never quite stops talking passes over him and tells the old story once again, the way it has for 800 years now, of the lonely boy who was left out on the cold to die and simply, quietly did not. Rest now, sleep well.